In June 2020, India's strategic patience was tested in the icy heights of the Galwan Valley. A brutal clash with Chinese troops led to the deaths of 20 Indian soldiers, marking the first fatalities in the India-China border standoff in over 4 decades. That confrontation didn't just shake the line of actual control, it shifted the nature of India-China ties permanently. Now, 5 years later, Indian Foreign Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar has returned to Beijing, in a climate still fraught with mistrust, imbalances, and rising geopolitical stakes. This visit is not business as usual. It is a reflection of both necessity and vulnerability, a high-wire act of diplomacy in the shadow of military standoffs, economic dependencies, and growing ideological divergence. A polite exchange over deep fault lines during his meeting with Chinese Vice-President Han Zheng ahead of the SCO summit in Beijing. Jaishankar said what most diplomats say, that the international situation is complex, and that open exchanges between major economies like India and China are important. But behind these carefully crafted words lies the weight of unresolved tensions. The Galwan clash has not faded from memory. On the ground, troops from both nations remain stationed at friction points along the line of actual control. Despite several rounds of military talks and temporary agreements such as a recent limited border patrolling deal to enable Modi and Xi's participation in multilateral events, the broader disengagement remains incomplete. The problem is structural. Beijing does not appear interested in settling the border dispute with India. It has finalized borders with 12 of its 14 neighbors, but not India. Why? Because an unsettled border gives China leverage, a tool of coercive diplomacy that keeps New Delhi focused on land-based threats and diverts its strategic attention away from maritime ambitions and broader leadership in the Indo-Pacific. China's duplicity, demanding respect while undermining India. The duplicity of China's posture is now out in the open. Just days before Jaishankar landed in Beijing, the Chinese embassy in New Delhi issued a sharp warning regarding the Dalai Lama's succession. Indian political figures had extended birthday greetings to the spiritual leader, and the Dalai Lama himself suggested his successor would be born in a free country, a subtle jab at Beijing's occupation of Tibet. China was quick to react. Its embassy spokesperson Yu Jing criticized Indian leaders, scholars, and officials for improper remarks on Tibet. Tibet, or Xizang as Beijing calls it, was described as a thorn in bilateral ties and a burden for India. Yu warned that playing the Tibet card would be akin to shooting oneself in the foot. And yet, while China guards its so-called internal affairs with intensity, it routinely disrespects India's core concerns. It continues to assert territorial claims over Arunachal Pradesh, calling it South Tibet, supports Pakistan's military buildup, and actively blocks India's entry into global nuclear and trade groupings. The strategic doctrine, pressure, instability, and Danilo China's behavior toward India is not random. It follows a consistent strategic doctrine. That doctrine includes maintaining military pressure along the laxing diplomatic instability through regional elements, propping up India's adversaries, like Pakistan, preventing India from emerging as a peer power. We saw this clearly during the SCO defense ministers meeting, where India's defense minister Rajnath Singh declined to sign a joint statement. Why? Because China and Pakistan objected to India's proposal to include a reference to the Pahalgam terror attack. Instead, the final draft mirrored Pakistan's position and even made subtle references to Baluchistan, clearly an attempt to isolate India diplomatically. A shadow partnership. China and Pakistan. Beijing's support for Islamabad has become more open, more direct, and more dangerous. During India's recent Operation Sindoor, Chinese support to Pakistan reportedly included real-time satellite surveillance, radar optimization, and electronic intelligence to monitor Indian troop movements, an unprecedented level of tactical collaboration. Today, over 80% of Pakistan's military hardware comes from China, including platforms like the HQ-9 air defense system and the long-range PAL-15E air-to-air missiles. But the China-Pakistan partnership is evolving beyond arms sales. It's extending into strategic alignment. On June 19, China hosted a trilateral foreign secretaries dialogue in Kunming with Pakistan and Bangladesh, an emerging axis that could rival Indian influence in South Asia. Turkey is also expanding its defense ties with Bangladesh, and analysts believe this growing web of partnerships facilitated by China aims to dilute India's leadership role in the region. Tibet, Xinjiang, and the war on identity. Domestically, China continues to erase cultural identities in Tibet and Xinjiang. The Communist Party insists it alone has the right to appoint the next Dalai Lama, mirroring its controversial appointment of a state-backed Panchen Lama in 1995. In Tibetan regions, more than 1 million children, including 100,000 preschoolers, have been sent to state-run boarding schools where Mandarin replaces Tibetan and religion is replaced by political indoctrination. The Tibetan Action Institute calls this colonization through education process akin to cultural genocide. In Xinjiang, the oppression of Uyghur Muslims continues through surveillance, mass detention, and forced labor programs, issues that the international community often avoids addressing out of fear of Beijing's retaliation. Why the world stays silencio? Why isn't China being held accountable? The answer lies in global economic dependency. China controls over 90% of the world's rare earth processing and dominates production of rare earth magnets, essential for everything from smartphones to military jets. It has used this dominance as leverage, tightening export restrictions on minerals like gallium and germanium. These actions serve as warnings: resist China, and your supply chains could suffer. Even during Jaishankar's visit, when India raised concerns about supply chain barriers and trade restrictions, the underlying reality remained India, like many others, is still strategically dependent on Chinese inputs. India's dilemma: trade grows, while tensions remain. While Indian troops stare down PLA soldiers in Ladakh, bilateral trade continues to grow. This paradox highlights India's structural vulnerability. China continues to block India's membership in the Nuclear Suppliers Group. It shields Pakistan-based terrorists at the UN, and yet expects India to refrain from engaging with Taiwan, Tibet, or criticizing China's internal policies. As former Foreign Secretary Vijay Gokhale observed, China doesn't view India as a peer. It considers only the US and Russia as equals. India, in Beijing's eyes, is merely a referential power, significant only in how it affects China's global image. The geo-economic battlefield. This asymmetry isn't just about soldiers and summits, it's about supply chains and semiconductor factories. It's economic, structural, and systemic. To change the game, India must recognize that geopolitics rests on geoeconomics. Without a strong domestic industrial base, India's strategic posturing remains reactive. Multilateral groups like the Quad have promise, but they lack a coherent economic vision. Steps like the Quad Mineral Supply Chain Initiative are welcome but insufficient. India must move urgently to diversify supply chains, reduce import dependency on China, boost indigenous manufacturing of electronics, APIs, and rare earth materials. This will not only reduce strategic vulnerability, but also enhance India's position as a true peer on the world stage. A roadmap for strategic balance. Shift the current imbalance. India needs more than tough words or border diplomacy. It needs structural reforms anchored in 3 key pillars: economic strength, build an independent and resilient industrial base to reduce leverage from China's manufacturing dominance; strategic clarity, recognize the nature of Chinese strategy, one that thrives on ambiguity and coercion, and respond with consistent long-term policies; geopolitical confidence, assert India's regional leadership and deepen ties with nations willing to push back against China's overreach, not just in Asia, but globally. India has long played defense, while China has been playing chess. From the icy ridges of Galwan to the trade corridors of Kunming, China has pursued a consistent, long-term plan to contain India militarily, diplomatically, and economically. The way forward for India is not to wait for Chinese goodwill or hope for a sudden policy shift in Beijing. Instead, It must build the resilience, alliances, and economic independence necessary to assert its rightful place on the global stage. Respect is not given in diplomacy, it is earned through power, consistency, and clarity. India must no longer be seen as a referential power. It must be seen as an equal, and that equality will come not from Beijing's approval, but from New Delhi's resolve.